But I also wanted to thank you, the researchers and the artists that are going to participate at this conference very, very much because of your friendship and your trust. Without your friendship and your trust, this conference wouldn't be possible at all because you trusted me to put all of this together. And it was a big risk, you are aware of that. So thank you. So I'm going to speak to you about the 40th anniversary of Portuguese decolonization of Africa has acted as a catalyst in discussing how Portugal imagined colonial politics through moving images. How was cinema determined by colonial policies, and how were these policies projected by cinema? How did these propagandistic portrayals begin to be questioned by the Portuguese Novo Cinema? What representations were disposed in kind of a reverse shot to the representations of Portuguese colonialism by the national cinematographic projects of emerging African countries of Portuguese language? Some answers may be found in works that were censored and prohibited by Estado Novo. Propaganda colonial cinematographic representations were also later challenged by films made in the context of the liberation movements and by images that emerged out of the national cinematographic projection, and this is an idea of Jean-Michel Frodon, of the new Portuguese-speaking African countries. So this conference intends to go some way in highlighting common aspects in the emergence of cinema in Angola, Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau, which have all been studied individually. Anyway, I'm not speaking about Cape Verde or São Tomé e Príncipe, for instance, because these countries weren't able to have projects of cinema after their independence. So that's why I'm only speaking of Angola, Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau. So as you will see during this conference, the work of several speakers, researchers, curators and artists reunited at this conference show precisely that an articulated study can and must be made. Our presentations can provide a reflection on the roots of the emergence of the new cinema, from the militancy that uses film as a means of changing society and focusing on the birth through images, as Jean-Paul Godard called it, of new nations, being projected by the programs of the Marxist parties that assumed power. We will also make contributions to analyze how, through third cinema, the Cinema Novo of Brazil and Cuban cinema more specifically, in addition to the authors of the French Rive Gauche of Nouvelle Vague, all played a role in questioning the colonial representations of Portuguese dictatorship and, most of all, in the formation of the projects and cinematographic archives of emerging African nations. And apart from the reasoning of nationalistic propaganda, and those are questions again, how did these new countries tell the story of their own story through moving images? And finally, it will be discussed how, given the urgency of the present, the redemption of the past, an idea of Walter Benjamin, is realized through a cinema of resistance, an idea of Deleuze, such as that of Pedro Costa, and by other moving images artistic practices. How is author cinema and other artistic practices like Daniel Barroca and Filipe César decolonizing or not the imaginary? Can one discuss the existence of a post-colonial cinema, or is there a neo-colonialism underlying to certain moving images, artistic practices and investigations? In this, So Portuguese researcher and filmmaker João Mário Grilo states that the invention of cinema engendered a new humanity in which spectators form part of the images that they have seen, thereby constituting a history whose memory isn't sociological or statistical, but is instead affective, sensorial, and above all, corporal. He states that the aspect of cinema that is significant, and I quote, is the observational device which is founded by cinema and which each film declines in a precise manner, thereby installing in this process a certain idea of humanity with which one is supposed to associate oneself with the community of spectators. In this regard, he proposed the creation of an anthology of cinema, in which the latter may be conceived not in function of which the filmic images may be, but that which they actually have been during a succession of different moments in time. He states, each stage of humanity will therefore have the cinema and story that it deserves, and thus critical analysis assumes a fundamental role in this regard, to replenish the manner in which people see that which they have seen with a conscious gaze in the time when they originally watched it. Because after all, it is this gaze which is deposited inside the film cams. So, if humanity has confided ideas and emotions to the cinema and to moving images, as well as perversities, fears, and contradictions, we should explore knowledge of the man of cinema, the so-called imagined man and woman. So, Francesco Cassetti, in a recent book, tried to understand how to process the particular synchronicity between a film and its epoch, for that which he classified as the filmic gaze. He claims that cinema has forged new forms of subjectivity, redefined space and time, and expressed identities in terms of social factors, gender, race, and thus contributed to a massification of culture. The film eye of the century, cinema, not only registered a large number of events, but by filming these events, it was also able to structure a reflective experience for the spectator in order to be able to receive the images which have been filmed. Let me speak you a bit also of an idea of Jean-Michel Frodon, former director of Cahiers du Cinéma. Frodon says that both the nation and cinema require projection in order to exist. In this book, La Projection Nationale, Cinéma et Nation, Frodon notes how the society of nations has become the dominant form of social organization. In parallel, he states that cinema has established itself as a new mode of artistic creation, a producer of mythologies and source of entertainment for the masses. These findings emphasize the solidarity between the history of nations and of cinema. Both can only exist through projection. I was showing you a part of a work that Danielle recently presented in Belgium, and a film, an old film, one of the first colonial films of Portuguese Empire. The film is called Civilizing Action of Portuguese People, and during this film you can see people being exhibited, and also you can see the kind of civilizing action of Portuguese people during this period. So we would teach them how to dance Portuguese folklore and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to explain you a little bit of about the Estado Novo regime. The rise of Estado Novo regime in 1933 consecrated the transition to an authoritarian regime that commenced with the military revolution of May 28 on 1926. The development of a nationalistic ideology that legitimized the new regime thereby imposed itself and needed to be disseminated. This nationalism was based on the premise that individual loyalty and devotion to the state should override individual or group interests and herein the figure of Salazar embodied the values defended by the propaganda machine. The regime didn't foster a national film industry via which it sought to achieve international projection for the country. Nonetheless, an effort was made to use cinema in order to foster national projection. This is demonstrated by the production of propagandistic documentary films, which benefited from significant support compared to other means of artistic expression. So, while defining colonial policy and organizing national finances, the military dictatorship decided that the country should participate in major European exhibitions aimed at recognition of Portugal as colonial power, and this facet was projected in several expositions in 29, 30 and 31. So the general agent of the colonies, Armando Curção, for this purpose commissioned films from 3 teams, and if you are interested you can see them in Cinemateca Digital. Most part of the films are available there. If you need, I can give you the address later on. So, a decade-long almost void in terms of production of colonial film only ended with the creation of the cinematographic mission to the African colonies in 1937 by the Ministry of the Colonies, aimed at producing films that would communicate the colonizing effort and the progress achieved. In addition to recording the presidential visit to the colonies in 1938, exteriors were filmed for the full-length colonial propaganda film Empire Spell, Batisco Império. It was released on 1940. So the mission also commissioned several documentaries released in the 40s. I'm going to show you a little bit of one of those films. It's really interesting, and I'm so sorry because I wasn't able to translate it. But what you are going to see, it's quite interesting because, well, in this time, this period, the voiceover explains that their dream was to be independent, and it shows kind of a dramatization of that, and it's really interesting.
Naquele muito mau desenho em que os pais relembram bem o sonho de liberdade pagã. O preto acabará por vencer o branco. Eis o que os bonecos simbolizam. A última fase da luta contra a aguerrida extrema teve como chefe uma das grandes figuras da epopeia nacional. Deixei aqui, cuja memória um pequenino momento de emoção relembra a toda a hora. Nesta pantomima, o significado é o mesmo. O preto que impunha a arma representa o branco. Afinal, subjugado pelo preto, astuto e matreiro, que o expulsa. Tudo passou.
Thank you, Lucia. Well, subsequently, from the 50s onwards, the general agency of the colonies focused primarily on the production of economic and tourism propaganda films. 1951 marked the turning point for the Estado Novo regime. World War II shifted the global status quo that was also influenced by the emergence of new nations in the wake of the success of various national liberation movements. The regime proclaimed that it lived in splendid isolation, but also paradoxically sought international legitimacy by developing a rhetoric concerning the specificity of Portuguese colonialism. Nations, as we are aware, are imagined communities, are built upon symbolic archives, accumulating significant data for the construction of identity-based perceptions. Portugal accumulated a complex archive during the colonial period that had a long story and which in the 19th century underwent a turning point that led to the creation of a legitimizing narrative based on claiming the specificity of Portuguese colonialism in order to defend the historic right to maintain control over overseas territories. The political narrative concerning the so-called Portuguese way of being in the world was based on religion and also a supposed aptitude for creating specific race relations. The narrative concerning race relations, however, evolved in function of international economic and political pressures. The well-known phrase "from the Ming to Timor we are all Portuguese" marks a new outlook in the new colonial policy. Until the end of the 40s, this policy had an underlying anthropobiological vision that set a standard based on race and was opposed to miscegenation, and this was disseminated by leading figures of the anthropological schools in Portugal. In August 51, at the invitation of the Overseas Minister Sarmento Rodrigues, Brazilian sociologist Gilberto Freire began a visit to Portugal and to the Portuguese overseas. In a lecture that he gave in Goa, then called Portuguese India, he used for the first time the expression Lusotropicalism, and in its ensuing travel notebook, Adventure and Routine, he claimed that he observed in the field the existence of a unity of sentiment and culture that characterizes a community. Lusotropicalism, or a simplified short form of the concept, was incorporated within the official political rhetoric, especially through diplomatic channels for the purposes of international promotion. Internally, as demonstrated by film production, this term was only gradually adopted by the official narrative in film practices and by researchers. I'm going to show you a film that the Estado Novo paid Pascal Langot, a French filmmaker, to make it, and this film was presented in several places as a film which was not Portuguese propaganda. It was a secret production film, and so it shows the way they were doing things secretly.
Bem-vindo, bienvenue, welcome to Portugal, Mozambique.
Avec un demi-million d'habitants, Lourenço Marques est la moderne capitale de la vieille province portugaise de l'océan Indien, aujourd'hui État portugais du Mozambique. En effet, la récente révision constitutionnelle donne au Mozambique et à l'Angola la désignation d'État, qui garantit une beaucoup plus large autonomie interne. Lourenço Marques, comme d'ailleurs tout le Mozambique, reste la grande enclave latine au milieu d'une Afrique d'expression anglaise. Pour les 7 millions de Mozambicains, le niveau de vie s'est inégalement élevé au fur et à mesure de la grande croissance économique de ces dernières années. Les efforts d'industrialisation des villes et la modernisation de l'agriculture intensive ont eu des résultats positifs sur la classe ouvrière et la nouvelle bourgeoisie africaine. Mais les effets du progrès n'ont pas encore eu de grandes répercussions sur les populations rurales. L'influence du voisinage de l'Afrique du Sud et de la Rhodésie ralentit malheureusement quelque peu la construction de la fameuse société multiraciale que le Portugal s'acharne à réaliser sur ces terres d'Afrique.
So the film speaks of this lusotropicalism and the existence of a community multiracial, and well, it intends to project this idea of multiraciality of a country. So during several decades, Portuguese colonies were seldom put on film, and only the right kind of images got censorship approval, namely the ones presented by propaganda newsreels and documentaries. And in reverse shot, I'm going to speak a little bit of the Portuguese cinema novo. The new cinema wasn't born in the context of an open attitude of the regime. As an author-based cinema, the cinema novo emerged from the ashes of the failure of the first law intended to protect Portuguese cinema, a law from 1948. So the period between the huge cinematic successes of Portuguese cinema during the 30s and the 40s and the early 60s was quite disappointing. It was at this time that the Fundo Nacional do Cinema introduced support for training through the award of scholarships. The affirmation of author cinema began to gain pace with the injection of new ideas by filmmakers who had been trained outside the influence of the regime. When they returned to the country, and returning to Portugal was a condition for receiving a scholarship, the situation was still the same. The main change took place in the conscience of these authors, in their conceptions of cinema, that shaped a new perspective about the country. It is undeniable that the new aesthetic unveiled a questioning perspective concerning new topics. However, the cinema nouveau authors had to deal with Estado Novo very harsh censorship. It is therefore important, I think, to screen the censored films and thus redeem the space that projection, a fundamental condition of cinema, failed to create for some of them. I'm going to show you just two examples of films that I worked. Some of you are already fed up, but okay. For instance, Faria de Almeida got the government support to film everyday life in Mozambique's capital in '64. After being censored, a Guinness record of 103 cuts, Catem was prohibited. I'm going to explain you a bit what were the stories of the film, and I will quote the presentation of the film made to the Fund of Cinema. So the first revolves around the city of the great buildings, tourist locations, the splendor that makes Lourenço Marques one of Africa's most beautiful cities. The second is a research report, an attempt to get to know the people, their way of thinking, the atmosphere that typifies the city of Lourenço Marques. The third is a poetic love story. It's poetic because it's partially located in the poetic town of Catem. It's about love because the main action will take place in the luso dancing that is typical in Lourenço Marques due to the harmony between the races where whites and blacks, Portuguese and South Africans have fun and love, live in the best imaginable communion between races. So, I'm going to show you kind of less in parallel. The first fragment is the opening fragment of the film, and it's Faria de Almeida itself who is questioning people in the center of Lisboa, asking them, what do you know about Lourenço Marques?
Eu gostava que nos dissesse que ideia que faz de Lourenço Marques.
Nenhuma, absolutamente.
Mas nunca teve interesse em ir a Lourenço Marques.
Imenso.
Faz ideia de como é a vida?
Nada, absolutamente nenhuma. Não faço ideia do que será Lourenço Marques.
Tem ideia que Lourenço Marques é uma cidade com isocel?
Sim, porque fotografias me dizem que deve ser qualquer coisa de grande.
E à volta de Lourenço Marques, faz ideia?
Nada, absolutamente nada. Faço, eu tenho a impressão de que seja tudo mato.
This sequence is a sequence of the first Sunday. So that sequence, the second one, it shows the Sunday of the white people living in Lourenço Marques. And well, after that you have the hard work of the black fishermen of Catem. So in 1972, Joaquim Lopes Barbosa, a movie buff, he didn't study cinema, made a film, At Least Let Me Climb Up the Palm Trees, about power abuses at colonial farms in Mozambique. And the film also couldn't be projected. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story in order for you to understand the bits I chose. In a colonial farm, the black foreman submits the black workers to endless and arduous hours of forced work in cultivating the fields, which often end only with the breakdown of the weakest. One day, the foreman rapes Maria. She is the daughter of Madala, an elderly worker who faces the wrath of his fellows who incite him to revolt. Madala, however, is incapable of rebelling, accepting a bottle of wine from the offender, and eventually succumbs to grief.
Repeat. Repeat.
Wintermere. Ay,
Ay, Carlos con los hermanos.
putar la cadena.
Se queda mandando el tajo que malo con Paul.
So, I'm going to speak you now about Aleph as an action research platform to criticize colonial imaginaries. And this idea that we must reimagine and to recreate in order to be able to criticize these colonial imaginaries. So, what is Aleph? The Aleph is a short story by the Argentine writer and poet Jorge Luis Borges. In Borges' story, the Aleph is a point in space that contains all other points. Anyone who gazes into it can see everything in a universe from every angle simultaneously without distortion, overlapping, or confusion. The Aleph also recalls the monad as conceptualized by Leibniz, the 17th century philosopher and mathematician. Just as Borges, Aleph registers the traces of everything else in the universe, so Leibniz's monad is a mirror onto every other object in the world. As some of you are probably aware, Aleph is also the first letter of many alphabets, and the Hebrew alphabet, and the number 1 in Hebrew, and it has esoteric meanings. So, what is Aleph? The platform and the network I aim to promote. Well, Aleph promotes cooperation and the sharing of knowledge between researchers, curators, artists, and citizens interested in colonial images. It articulates and works with archives holding colonial collections in raising awareness about preservation needs and open access to colonial collections. Aleph aims also to promote open access and the sharing of knowledge through a digital platform, Mirror, yet to be done. And why do I want to do this? Because these films I showed you, until my research, they didn't exist in terms of history of cinema, you know. Even after 74, after the democracy arrived to Portugal, they were shown only twice. And that's why I began to study these films. I wanted to comprehend why didn't these films were shown, even after the rise of democracy. And there are several cases as these. Okay, so, and I have this idea about using an action research methodology, and I ask, how can action research methodology be integrated into the exploration, development, and application of today's moving images studies to reimagine and recreate colonial imaginary? Because I think one cannot be only in cabinets writing stuff. I think we must act also. And I give you, for instance, the example of Catarina or Raquel, that are both researchers and filmmakers and work with colonial private archives or not so private, or for instance the work of Daniel. That's what Daniel is doing also as an artist, having the ability of thinking also about the work he is doing. And that interests me a lot, because I think it's this encounter, this meeting, that these two ways of doing things that can be more, well, that can help us to reimagine and recreate what this colonial imaginary left on us. So, on the 21st of January, 1 year ago, a session under the title Colonial Collection of the Portuguese Film Archive, Shot, Reverse Shot off Screen, was organized at the Portuguese Film Archive. It included a colonial film screening as well as a debate about the creation of this network called Aleph. A few months later, some of us met, and it was very nice to have your contribution to this, at the 5th annual meeting of the Portuguese Association of Researchers of Moving Images, and we had the lucky of having Lucia Najib as our respondent. And we worked under a title, Portuguese Empire and Independence, Contributions Towards a Genealogy of Colonial Representations in Moving Images. After that, and every month, we've been showing at Portuguese Film Archive some films that in some cases were never shown. So, for instance, O Romance do Luachim, it was presented in July by José da Costa Ramos, which is sick and cannot be here today. And, well, in September, Catarina Simão, which is an artist and researcher, presented Moeda, Memória e Massacre. Teresa Castro presented Nossos Irmãos, Os Africanos. Paulo Cunha, for instance, it shows the selection of family and amateur colonial films and presented it at the Film Archive. Catarina Laranjeiro in January presented a film that's more known, but it still has to be studied, Arte dos Feitos de Guiné. And for instance, Raquel Schaeffer is going to present O Vento Sopra do Norte, and Leandro Mendonça is going to present some films about the independence of Angola and Mozambique. So, until the end of the year we'll be doing this, and this conference makes part of this action we are taking, we are doing. So we have some results and some problems, and I would like to share them with you, because I would like us, during the period of time available for that, to discuss this. I think we have a bigger awareness about the poor preservation of the colonial collection of Portuguese Film Archive. I've been dealing with them about this. Sometimes I want to show films and the response I get is it's not possible because the film is not preserved. So this is a problem, and they are trying to arrange things and to make a better preservation of this collection. So after this, I have also the interest of other institutions with colonial archives. For instance, I was quite surprised and pleased, but the military archive told me they are interested in participating in a project, a platform, and put some of their films there. So we got this institutional support for action research through the conference and to the film programs, and I think we are getting a better articulation between researchers and artists. And a strong point is the inclusion of artists and curators in our research practices, and I hope vice versa too. And I think we are getting a bigger public, national and international awareness and debate on the colonial archive, because we were able to get press coverage of some of these events. And for instance, tomorrow Lusa and FDP International are going to be at London conference. So, the problems. The informal existence of Aleph until now makes it too dependent of one person initiative. Zé Carlos was telling me it's kind of a dictatorship you have there, no? So I think, I question, should Aleph existence become more formal, and how? Through an institutionally supported project, and I'm thinking about that, and if we do that together, I think we have to speak about it. And the communication, I think we have some communication problems between Aleph informal members. How can the communication become more fluid and two ways? Should Aleph really integrate everyone interested in action research to criticize colonial imaginaries, or should Aleph integrate only people that are actively contributing to recreate and reimagine? So, Aleph aims the creation of an open access digital platform gathering publicly and privately owned colonial archives. It will not just compile this research repository, but will also ask questions about the complex uses of the past and will gather a multidisciplinary group of researchers, curators, and artists. Platform Mirror, as I call it now, is inspired, but will have other developments on colonial film, moving images of the British Empire, and tomorrow we'll have Lee Griffson with us to speak about it, that holds detailed information on over 6,000 films showing images of life in the British colonies and made available for viewing online over 150 films. I'm just finishing. I think it's really important to make a contribution to a genealogy of the film in colonial images, and I think the deconstruction of the colonial filmic rhetorical device of the Portuguese Estado Novo is still in an incipient phase, and this is a contribution towards filling a void. I personally critically question the awareness of Portuguese current identity, and I think one need to know thyself in the Gramscian sense of the term, on the basis of analysis of the projection of man by the colonial archive and on the basis of the infinite number of traces left in the images. I propose that the films should be projected and debated, thus revealing the imagined man and woman projected through Portuguese state propaganda, but also through films made in the context of Cinema Novo, the liberation movements, and by images that emerged out of the national cinematographic projection of the new Portuguese-speaking African countries. Thank you so much for your attention.